Empower 2020 attendees. I'm Paige McFeely, CEO and co-founder at BASE, and your moderator for today's session with Lucy Brazier. Our panel today will discuss how technology plays a part in evolving the assistant role. Please welcome our guest, Lucy.
Hi, how lovely to see you, Paige. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
So lovely to have you. For our audience, many of you I'm sure know her, but just in case, Lucy Brazier is CEO of Marcham Publishing and publisher of Executive Secretary magazine. I recently had the pleasure of speaking at the Executive Secretary Tech Conference on the future of work and how assistants play such a crucial role. Lucy, I'm so excited to discuss what you learned at Exec Sec Tech, as I'm sure it's a big part of the conversation that we're going to be having today. Before we dive in, can you give our attendees just a little bit more background of yourself? And I would love it if you're okay sharing that story that you just shared with me about the very first article in Executive Secretary magazine.
Oh yes, I'd be delighted to. So just to give you a bit of background on me then, if you don't know me, I have been in publishing since I was 18 years old. I worked for local press, I worked for national press at the Times and at the Independent, and I ended up working at a company running 13 magazines and lots of events and about a £94 million budget, which was very lovely. And then in 2010, I burnt out and I went home and I picked up the newsletter that I had inherited in 2003 from a very lovely lady who decided I was the right person to continue running it. And the rest is history. I have spent the last 10 years initially seeing it as a publishing project purely because it's a very exciting marketplace. It's 98% women. It is a fifth of the world's working population working in admin, and that means it's about 500 million women worldwide, and then the 2% of men that work in this profession. And I very quickly realized that it was also a group of women who, on the whole, felt either undervalued or who undervalued themselves. And it has kind of become my mission and my passion to travel the world and to talk to executives and HR directors and to persuade the world of work of the value of the assistant and why they are probably the best asset within the business. But what was really exciting is, well, you can see, well, you probably can't see, but I've just moved into my office in Spain. I only got here a couple of weeks ago. We were due to move in April and then COVID hit and we had to delay it for months and months. Finally got here 2 weeks ago, brand new office, lovely, unpacking everything, and came across this, which is the very, very first issue ever of Executive Secretary from 1989, so 31 years old now. And when I opened it, see it's issue 1, volume 1, when I opened it, the very first article we ever had was this one, which I don't know if you can see that, the role of the secretary in the technological office. And then I was reading it, and it's really interesting. I might actually send a PDF of it so that we can get it out.
Please do.
But the bit here that really made me smile in some ways and despair in others, although I do think we're getting there, was a paragraph that said, an editorial in practical computing said that once secretaries gain tools which complement their working patterns, it will become clear that they are not only the most crucial resource in the company, but also its most underutilized one. I think that is still absolutely key. And I would argue that actually, up until now, assistants probably haven't had the tools that they need to make sure that they are the best used resource in the office, because it's becoming more and more clear with this fourth industrial revolution that the skill sets that are going to be needed moving forwards are the ones that are human and that are personalized. And it's all the things like critical thinking and emotional intelligence and complex problem solving. But also, you know, all that stuff like negotiation and, you know, collaboration and all that, which is really becoming the skill sets that businesses need. All the things, in fact, that assistants are so amazing at. Yes. But I'm probably getting ahead of myself. I'm going to go back, let you ask.
You're reading my mind. This is exactly some of the questions that I'm going to be asking you in a couple moments. Thank you so much for sharing it. I think, I mean, it just shows what a crucial role this has been and continues to be. And of course, that's why BASE exists, because we couldn't believe that there was not a software built specifically for this crucial role. We are in all the important places, yet no one was really paying attention to us from a technology standpoint. And we can talk later about why I think that is, probably because it's a very complicated tool to build. So probably scared people away. But Anyway, what I want to talk about first is really about how we're seeing assistants utilize and leverage technology to grow in their role, and how that's more important today than ever before. So as we kick off our conversation, can you share a little bit about how you've seen the assistant role evolve? We're probably most notably, we're not called secretaries as much anymore. We're primarily called assistants, but also how that evolution is unlikely to stop anytime soon.
Yes, and actually even the assistant bit I don't particularly like anymore, because it suggests that they're assisting and not doing. And in fact, what's really interesting,
makes a ton
yeah,
of sense.
and Google has just changed the names of all its assistants to administrative business partner for the lower levels and executive business partner for the higher levels. And I think that's really exciting. Business support seems to be the way it's going. And actually, we're in the middle of a rebrand with executive secretary because it's becoming untenable. We've always said, oh, it's just a brand, but actually, I think it's getting more than that now. Especially in the States, it's seen as derogatory, so we need to change it. But
that's really interesting.
Going back, there are three really key changes that have taken place in the last 10 years, and all of them have driven the assistant position forward. And the first is that 10 years ago, we went through that huge recession. Do you remember when Lehman's went bang?
No, yes.
And at that point, they let all the assistants go. And I think it's notable to say that because they very quickly hired you all back again. The reason they hired them all back again was because they realized that actually the office just wasn't working. I think so many executives don't know what the assistant does. I think the latest research says that a manager is 46 years old before they get training in how to manage other people. And so very often they don't know how to use the assistant properly. So anyway, they hired all the assistants back, and then they let the middle management go. And then they came to the assistants and they said, oh, you know, you're so lovely. Do you think you could possibly pick up some of that stuff that the middle management was doing? And so now we have 87% of assistants doing event management, and about half of them doing HR, and a great many of them doing finance, all sorts of different things. And that's really exciting because I think that it takes them into other areas of the business. But then there's nothing more permanent than temporary. So they're still doing them. And most of them at that point didn't get any more pay or any more training. And that's something I think that they need to note, because we're seeing very much the same thing around COVID. And I'm not saying because I know that there's a lot of companies in a lot of trouble right now. But I do think that you should be taking note of where you are taking on things outside of your job role and learning new skills, so that when you come to your performance review, you're able to say, well, actually, I took this on and I taught myself and I did this, and now we're looking to different role. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing. The second change is this fourth industrial revolution, which we just talked about. And that is very much that you've seen the headlines, the Wall Street Journal, the case of the vanishing assistant. You know, the assistant role is going, there's never going to be here again. Very much like in the 1950s, where it was, oh, the electronic typewriter's just been introduced and they're all going to walk out the door. And then later on, you know, the computer was introduced and we were not going to have, but of course somebody has to know how to operate them and has to know how the processes and procedures work in the first place and how to utilize them properly. So it isn't ever going to happen, but there is a grain of truth in it. And here is where I think BASE comes in, because much of what the assistant has been doing up until now has been reactive, and it has been task-based. And the assistants at the level that are going to stay are the ones that are becoming more strategic. They're understanding their businesses more, they're understanding their executives more, and they're stepping up to really learn about the business so that they can work at that high level. But then, of course, somebody has to do those tasks, or something has to do those tasks. And it's saying, the World Economic Forum is saying that by 2025, 52% of work is going to be done by machines. It's going to all be AI based. And that, of course, is where BASE comes in. Because, you know, that repetitive stuff, in fact, the stuff that you don't really want to do, but I feel that some assistants hide behind, is the stuff that's going to go out the window. And so if you're continuing to be a task-based assistant that isn't utilizing the technology to give yourself the best chance to step up into that strategic role, your role will go. And it's interesting also, isn't it, that the US only actually has one category for administrative professionals, and that's at the lower level. So yes, the lower level assistants will go because they'll get taken over by the machinery. But that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Because what I think it does is it professionalizes the role. It means the assistants have a lot more to give and a lot more that they're capable of than they actually probably ever knew they were. We recently went in and did some training at one of the big 4 companies in London, and we upskilled their top assistants there. And the feedback for the last year says that the executives that they are supporting, their productivity has gone up by 28% as a result of them upskilling.
Outstanding.
So,
Not at all surprising, but
yeah,
tremendous that you could measure that.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, but that's because they took all the task-based stuff, and actually in their case, they gave it to a pool of assistants to do. Mm-hmm. But that isn't going to be where that ends up. Where it's going to end up is with base or whatever doing that work for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think we're going to see a lot of segmentation, though, or specialization, where maybe we will start to see assistants who are highly, highly skilled and proficient at travel, or highly, highly skilled and proficient at doing events. And we're already doing all of these things, but I think we're going to start to see, just as outsourcing and the future of work becomes more and more of a reality for us, people are going to start to specialize and say, here's the thing that I can deliver the most value at in my particular role and how it aligns to the goals of my organization. And then the rest needs to fall off my plate. And that's what assistants do, I believe, on a broad level for their executives, but that's what BASE is intending to do for them. And in a lot of situations, I think assistants need their own assistant. So whether BASE is that, or they get a person who's the assistant, or both, I think we're going to see that more and more in the future.
And I think that's really interesting, Paige, because I think I already saw over the last 10 years with the virtual assistants that they found their niche, and they then supported, you might get some that support consultants, some support sales staff, some support events company, whatever it happens to be. And there's a big confusion at the moment between virtual assistants and assistants that are home-based. It's not the same thing at all. So remote assistants, virtual assistants, not the same thing at all. Virtual assistants are people who are autonomous, they have their own businesses, they are employed, and they have to do all the marketing and taxes and everything else themselves. The remote assistants are ones who are employed full-time by businesses. But yes, I think that's a really interesting idea, looking at assistants that are specializing in certain areas. And as I say, a lot of them are spending a lot of their time getting into other areas. The third change, by the way, just so you know, is obviously COVID. And talking about remote work, of course, it's changed everything. But I think actually for the assistant role, COVID is really interesting, and it's an opportunity. And the reason I think it's an opportunity is because I'm getting two types of assistants right now. I'm either getting the ones that are doing exactly what I just said about the last recession, who are going, I have so much to do and I don't know how I'm ever going to do it. And I don't know how to do a lot of it because it's stuff I wasn't doing before. Or I'm getting assistants who are saying, oh my goodness, they can't see my value. Nobody's talking to me. Nobody's telling me what to do. And I'm very much, you know what? Your executive is off saving the world at the moment. They're in an unprecedented situation and they're trying to work it out. So when you come going, what would you like me to do? They go, whatever it is we pay you to do, go do it,
Right.
So I really think the assistants that grab hold of that and understand that actually they are the chaos tamers. They are the ones who take that mess that we've got at the moment and go, right, we're going to unravel it and we're going to put the procedures and the processes in place to make sure this works. I would rather stick pins in my eyes and do process or procedure. I'm the one who comes up with ideas and then I throw them to Matt and he makes them happen, Matt being my assistant. So there is a real power in being the voice in the room that understands how to do that. And so I think they've got to stop asking permission and just do. And I think they have to sit there and write down where they feel they could fill the gaps in the procedures that aren't there already. Maybe they could go and do briefing documents or research into what other companies are doing. Whatever it is, get busy, because this is an opportunity to show your executives exactly what you're made of and why they need you. They won't ever ask again if you get it right.
I could not agree with you more on what you're saying here. We talk so much about experimentation and how important that is. Even if you get it wrong, the fact that you've taken the initiative and you've tried, you've guessed the answer to a handful of things, you've booked something, whatever it might be, that shows initiative. Because what I think executives really, really want, and I'll get to how I feel like we need to change the conversation on the executive side as well in a moment. What I think they really, really want is to feel seen and heard and understand. And part of that is the soft skill of managing up. That is a hard thing to teach. But I think you can wrap some processes around it, and BASE is really trying to do that, where our goal is anybody using BASE, they're just kind of intrinsically shining through the outputs that they're sending to their executives. So they're not feeling so much like they're having to brag about themselves, but still communicating like, here's how I'm adding to the bottom line, which the executive should be able to do for their role as well. And I imagine that's where a lot of this disconnect comes in. But to your earlier point about executives not being sure how to work with their assistant, this is so persistent. We see it all over the place now. And so BASE is, especially at the end of this year and into next year, we're going to be talking a lot to executives too, to flip the tables around and say, how are you supporting your assistant? How are you getting the most out of this relationship? And do it from the lens of technology, and as a way to enhance their partnership, to see which are the ones that are really getting it. And then how can we replicate that from a technological standpoint to make sure that it's easier than ever before to work with an assistant, and then also easier than ever before to find an assistant? Because I think it's great that we see all these C-suite and upper level executives supported, but what about all of the other tremendous knowledge workers in an organization that's just unheard of? But that's kind of our evil plan, is to make sure that everybody who's considered a knowledge worker has at least some access to an assistant. But that comes with changing the conversation and glorifying this role. I think it's so important.
I think it's understanding really what an assistant is. And I think I had an assistant for the first time. I had no clue. I was 29. She arrived and I was like, oh, I'm your boss and here's things you could do. And she was just like, no, that's not what I do. And I was really lucky because she really knew how to manage me and taught me how to use her. I think it's so important that the assistants remember that it is the business that employs them. It's not their executive. And have they ever asked themselves why the business employs them? The business employs them to make sure that the business is getting as much from every hour that the executive is working as they can. So if the executive is doing things that the assistant should be doing, for example, calendar, travel, email, all that stuff that takes up so much time, research on clients before they go out to visit them. The list is endless. We've got lists like this of things they could do. Every time an assistant does that for an executive, it saves the executive an hour of their time and it saves the company an hour of their salary. So the best ones are probably literally giving their executive back 100% of their time. Mm-hmm. And the worst ones are giving them maybe 20%, 30%. Whatever way you look at it, drop that to the bottom line and then look at how they spend that time after that. Using that time to come up with new business deals and new revenue streams and saving the world in the case at the moment. That's what they're also dropping to the bottom line. And that's before they do the day job and save money on flights or on meeting rooms or on hotels or all the other things they do. So I just don't understand why businesses don't get that actually this could really be a hugely valuable resource if they get it right.
I know. And I would love to talk to you more about how we connect that to the actual business output, because I think once we solve that equation, then it's a no-brainer. But right now it looks like another line item or a much larger line item that is really hard to validate if you can't draw that direct correlation. But I'm sure we could talk about this forever. I want to keep moving down our list of topics because there's so many interesting things to talk about now.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on embedding technology into your daily workflow. You recently assembled quite an ensemble for ExecSec Tech. And so I'd love to hear any key takeaways for how to know where and when to utilize technology and automation.
It was so interesting, Paige, because I had been using technology and not really thinking about it. And I've been writing for the magazine, but you know how it is, PR people send stuff in, and you go and do a bit of research, and then you get something written or whatever it happens to be. But I spent 3 months really researching because I realized that if I was going to do the event justice, it had to be what was the most use to the assistants. So lots of talking to the assistants and then talking to companies and talking to EAs actually who worked at the companies for the products that we were getting out there. And that was a real eye-opener. I mean, I came across some wonderful things that I'm now using myself, or things that I was using that I'm now using differently. And, just as a couple of examples. So Zapier, for example, I mean, ITTT is this, then that. Wonderful, but Zapier, I'm just connecting things with stuff so that I don't have to worry about doing the piece by piece bit. My CRM system always talked to my account system, always talked to my receipt bank system, always talked to MailChimp, which we use also. but actually getting all that stuff tied into all the other stuff that we do, so I don't have to worry about it anymore, and creating automated processes, I think is just going to save us the most enormous amount of time and money. But also there's things like, so Otter, I don't know if you've come across Otter AI, which is just wonderful. It's on your phone and you literally just record a meeting, or in my case, I'm writing a book of my course. So I've just finished doing all the filming of my book, and now I'm playing it to Otter, and it's just going straight off to the guy who's going to edit it for me. So that again is going to save me an inordinate amount of time. It's just, I just have really fallen in love with technology, having always been quite scared of it, having seen the practicalities of it. But I think it's a little bit like, I was always told I was rubbish at math, and I never passed a math exam in my life. And then when I went into business and I had to do math because it was actually about real things, then suddenly you realize that it's actually really quite exciting. It's the same with all of my technology. I actually have I'm going to whisper it because otherwise you'll hear over there. But if I say that too loud, she'll wake up and start going, what do you need? What do you need? But, you know, I say, can you remind me in 10 minutes, I've got this meeting. Can you buy some more paper? Can you make sure that you're getting me a taxi? Or actually my husband has one at home, and he says when I'm not traveling, where's Lucy today? And it's hooked into my calendar and tells him where I am, otherwise he'd never know. So, you know, I love it. It's great.
That's fantastic. I can't live without Zapier for sure. Loom is a big one that I use a lot.
Oh yes, for filming film, for demonstrating. Yeah, great.
And even just within our team, because we can't share each other, you know, someone can't walk over to my desk and see what I'm looking at. And so we just record a quick 30-second or 2-minute, whatever video to talk about something rather than having to type it out. And it's allowed us to communicate asynchronously, but feel like we're having real-time conversations. That's really, really fantastic.
And Trello is, Trello we use all the time, and our workflow for the magazine, putting that together, is all on Trello, because our designers are in India and our senior editor is in the UK, and I'm in Spain, and you know, so it's kind of that whole workflow. But then also my whole team is based all over the world. So we communicate on WhatsApp, and they do exactly what you do in the office. I'm like, no more pictures of cats today. None, please.
That's fantastic. We're on Slack. I don't know how we would run this organization without Slack. We just couldn't. Everything is in there. We never even email one another, all because we're so Slack native. So it's fun to see how different organizations structure their technology in different ways. It's pretty interesting. Were there any big surprises from the event, or any big aha moments that either you had? It sounds like many of your aha moments were leading up to the event with the research that you were doing, but any big takeaways that maybe the attendees had coming out of the event that you'd like to share?
Oh, I think a lot. I mean, Slack for me, actually, I looked at and went, I wish we'd found this first, but now everything's on Trello, so we may have to look at that at another time. But I loved the presentation on Slack. I was just sitting there going, I can think of all the possibilities of this. Yeah. And then there was a guy who came and talked about how you build apps on Microsoft. And that was all really interesting, and how you do kind of automation and product flow that way. And I thought, I just went, he took our process for how we organize our events and went, this is a 32-step process, and we could automate this. And I was, whoa, how much money is that costing us? So that was a huge one for me. But also I think Rhonda Scarf talking about Alexa, funnily enough, and saying this is how AI is going to work moving forwards, was doing the interview with her, you know, because I had been kind of going, well, yes, AI of course is going to come and revolutionize the workplace, but I would like to see the machine that could take a meeting and reorganize it in 10 minutes, making sure everybody's specifications are taking into place. And she went, it already is. And I went, sorry, you know? So actually that whole conversation with her really made me wake up to the fact that actually they will do it far more efficiently, and they're not going to have bad moods or arguments with their husbands. They're just going to come in and do the thing. And so that frees you up to go and do the things which you really need to think in a different way about. And that's exciting, I think, you know? I just think the whole event stopped me being fearful. It made me go, here are some amazing new tools for me to do my job with.
Yes. Well, it's almost as if you can read my mind, because my next question for you was talking about how technology can feel really, really overwhelming. But I'd love to hear from your vantage point. Are you seeing that people are overcoming this fear, and are they feeling less overwhelmed, whether through your events or just kind of giving it a try? And if so, how are you helping them overcome that?
I think, Paige, the interesting thing was we did Global, which was our more broad event back in June, and it was great, and lots of positive feedback. But obviously, when we came to do the next one, we were, well, what do you want next? And they said tech. I mean, unanimously tech. And when we went and questioned more, it was about the fact that they were feeling that they had terrible imposter syndrome, or that they were going to get caught out any minute. And they were saying it isn't that they didn't want to learn, it was purely that there was so much of it, and finding time to get to it so that they could learn in any depth, so that they could have an opinion on it. And they were scared that when somebody was mentioning, for example, Sana, and they was going, you know, that their boss was going to go, but you should know about this stuff. And so they were going and learning at a surface level. And then as soon as they gave a surface opinion, their bosses were going, oh, well, tell me more. And then they didn't know. So they were worried that their bosses were going to start going, well, this is stuff you really need to be catching up with. But, you know, we did 48 hours of training, and I don't think we scratched the surface, really. There's so much out there. But what it did was to give them 2 days where they could learn enough that they could offer an opinion or feel like they knew a bit about the differences between the different platforms and the different things that were available. And for those that are using Google and those that are using Microsoft, you know, they suddenly discovered all sorts of tools they didn't know that were there. So it just makes them that bit up, I think, to everybody else. So that was why we did it. It seems to have done the trick. The feedback's been amazing, and it ended up being over 1,000 people. So, you know, it's
so
yeah,
great.
but I'm hoping they're feeling, the feedback is that they're feeling a lot more comfortable with it, and that they're glad they did it. And we're hoping that it will be a kind of one-stop shop every year, which is 2 days where you go, okay, so what's new since last year, so that we continue to educate.
Yes, that's great. I see from my vantage point as well that we're seeing a more common mindset that technology is here to help you. It is here to make your life easier and can do all of these things. But then the next stage seems to be what you just mentioned. I've jumped in, but now I'm all of a sudden juggling a dozen or more tools. So it's almost as if someone should build, you know, like one tool for assistance that can help combine that.
Funny that.
I know. And I do actually feel like we're finally getting to that point. A lot of what we were doing was laying the foundation to start, and we were creating tools that didn't exist before, but now we've got a task list manager in there, and we're starting to connect the dots, which is really, really exciting. But I think then the importance when you find all these tools that you love, but then you're switching back and forth, and then maybe your executive is finding tools that they love too, and so you've got to juggle those two, and finding that system for how it works with you can be really, really overwhelming. Do you get that question a lot?
Oh, yes, of course. And actually, I was saying, I loved Slack. The Slack thing finished. I went to my team on WhatsApp. I love Slack. And they all just went, no. I was like, but the last thing we need is another thing. Another thing. I was like, okay. We'll stick with Trello for now. But, you know, I think that's the thing. Teams all finding different things, all reading different things, all seeing different webinars. And because we're all at home, we are all exploring different ways of doing things. And so it isn't like being in an office anymore where IT kind of goes, here is the thing that we've decided we're going to use.
Yeah.
We're all using bits and pieces, aren't we?
Are you seeing on an organizational level that, I know it's not IT saying here are the 4 tools you're going to use, but are you seeing any different kinds of standardization, whether it's through security or here's how we're going to communicate with one another, or anything on that organizational level for how to manage technology and all of the different things flying in different directions?
I think they're searching now. I mean, I think when COVID hit, suddenly everybody went, oh, how are we going to communicate? And you know, then we got a lot of emails about Teams, and we got an awful lot of emails about Zoom, and then Zoom went bonkers, and you know, suddenly all the headlines were how dangerous it was, and still we're getting people going, do you think Zoom is dangerous? And I'm like, well, no, actually, I think it's a really good example of how they fixed it quickly. You know, a good technology company going, yes, we screwed up, but here we go. Here's the fix. But I think they're just looking for the thing. I don't think they've really found the thing. It feels to me like at the moment they're looking at all the different options and trying them out. And unless they were using stuff before COVID hit, they're still probably giving different people different bits to try out to see what works best for their company. There's so much of it, and so much of it is good, but nothing specifically for assistants. So, you know, I mean, I think this is great. If it integrates with everything else, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and BASE right now, it really does two things. It helps to streamline the communication, especially on a team level. So if you've got 3 or you've got 100 assistants, you can start to standardize how are we going to communicate, particularly through the lens of how are we going to communicate our value that we're adding through daily updates, through weekly updates, and also when we're together, whether that's face-to-face on Zoom or one day together in an office, to really help them shine. And all the while building this single source of truth for the assistant to make sure that they've got all of their information in one place. They're really minimizing the back and forth between apps, but all of it is then portable. So when there is transition, as we know there's transition, maybe the assistants are supporting double the amount of people right now than is ideal. So ideally soon they're starting to get some of that off their plate, and they can say, this workspace is yours now, that one's yours. So we're so excited about the future for BASE and where that's headed, because it feels to me like we're just barely scratching the surface, to your earlier point.
And I think that's really interesting for another reason, which is that assistant role is a very strange one. And it's a very strange one because in the case of most people in a business, they have a department. So you would have a department for engineering or a department for accounts or whatever. Assistants don't have that because they work for different departments. So what you tend to find is that they're siloed and they're working on their own across the business, and they don't have a central resource. So many companies do not link their assistants at all. And then they come to our events and they go, oh, thank God, it's not just me. I thought it was just me. And actually, to have something that connects the assistants across the business so that they're sharing best practice and worries and where the best restaurant is that you can eat vegan food, or where the best safe taxi service is, all that stuff is meaning that the company hasn't got numerous people reinventing the wheel, which saves time, which saves money. So, you know, I actually think that even if we weren't in this COVID situation, having a central resource where the assistants can talk to each other and share best practice, share templates, talk to each other, it's just so good for businesses. I advocate all the time for setting up internal assistant networks. In fact, I did the internal assistant network for Buckingham Palace.
That's a cool story.
It is. I went and did it. I went and stood there and presented in the palace.
Wow, that's pretty neat. Yes. And, you know, we're also seeing on the executive side too, as we start to talk to larger and larger companies where the C-suite, they're wanting to understand as well, how can we standardize the communication, because they don't want to have to recreate the wheel. And to our earlier discussion, they're not necessarily sure what to ask for either. So it's been an interesting evolution where we're starting to see executives, every organization has goals. Let's say that they're OKRs or MITs, whatever framework they're using, but very few of them are leaning on this hierarchy that's already in place within their organization, the support hierarchy, to help hold them accountable, help communicate progress against them. And that's when assistants can grab onto that, then they're literally tying what they're doing to that particular OKR or goal, whatever we're going to call it. And it's like the response has been really, really positive, which is pretty cool.
It's so interesting that too, because I find assistants come all the time saying, I have got my meeting, I've got my personal development meeting, and I need to be setting goals and objectives. And it's our most read article ever. It is about 6 times more than any other article that we've got, is the one that Marie Herman did on setting goals ahead of your personal development meeting. And they come and say, what do I do? And I say, what's your executive's goals? And they say, I don't know. And I say, and what are their KPIs? I don't know. And what does success look like for them this week, this month, this year? Because that could be totally different again. What are they trying to achieve this year? Because if you don't know that stuff, how can you possibly help them to get there? Right. And so then they go and they ask, they come back and go, oh,
Yeah.
But I also, it's just understanding how to get the most of them. I know that Richard Branson, for example, calls Helen Clark, his assistant, his memory, and he takes her into every leadership meeting because he says she remembers all the things he's agreed to do and all the things that everybody else has agreed to do, and then she holds them all to account and says that needs to be done by then and that needs to be done by then. And it also means that you can see on the horizon when there's going to be big workloads or where you need to allocate time. It means you understand the business better, so you can offer suggestions. Because as I said earlier, you are the only one as an assistant who understands that process procedure piece. So you might not be able to go, okay, here's a strategy that's going to change the world, but you can go, that's the strategy that's going to change the world, and this is how you implement it step by step.
Yes, yeah. We always call at 33 Vincent, the last company I started, the remote EA business, our motto was changing the world by helping world changers. And I love that so much because it's exactly true. That is how you change the world, is through this courageous help. It's really so important. Richard Branson wouldn't have nearly as much success, I'm sure, if he didn't have Helen there to be his memory. I wish I had another memory like that. But yes, I think when we start seeing assistants send a daily digest saying, here are the 3 things that I did today or this week that directly contribute to your goal, find me an executive that is not blown away and never going to want to let that assistant go. Like, it's impossible.
Yep. Anne Hyatt has a wonderful story. Anne Hyatt, who was the chief of staff at Google, where she says that she used to work for Jeff Bezos before she went to Google. And she said that she was there for the first 6 months, and they used to employ somebody every year that they called the shadow. And the shadow would sit in on every single one of Jeff Bezos's meetings and try and learn the way that he thought and the way he acted. And the idea is that at the end of every year, they take the shadow and they put them back in the business. So that if anything ever happens to Jeff Bezos, they've got a whole load of people who know how to run the business. And Anne said she was halfway through her first year as Jeff's EA, and she suddenly realized that she was also the shadow. She was in every single meeting that the 2 of them were in. And she said at that point, she stopped thinking about herself as the assistant and realized that actually she was in there to do the same thing that the executive did, just with different skill sets. Because when you get it right, it's like 2 sides of a coin. It's like one perfect person for the company, and it's like one of you breathes in and one of you breathes out. And when you get that, it's magic, So and so being in that situation where you change the mindset and go, okay, I'm also the shadow, I think it totally changes the way that you feel about yourself as somebody who's part of the business, not sitting outside of the business as support. You're in the business working alongside your executive with a kind of common dream to get to the end result, just doing different sides of the coin.
Absolutely integral to success.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time here. Can you share with our audience how to best get in touch with you, how to attend your events, and how to learn more about Executive Secretary?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I would have said to connect with me on LinkedIn, but I just hit the maximum number of connections, so you'll have to follow me. So
I didn't even know that's a thing.
It is 30,000 and they cut it. You can't connect anymore. You can only get followers. So fine, follow me. I'd love that. I'm on Twitter, Lucy Brazier, and the website is executivesecretary.com, and you'll find all the stuff on there that you could possibly imagine. But Paige, this has been such a joy. Thank you. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Lucy. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you.